what you didn't know, an alien was there during the final days leading to Jesus' crucifixion. Imagine witnessing history not as a human, not as a believer, but as an observer from beyond the stars, feeling the vibrations of fear, love, and choice pulse through every soul in Jerusalem. I am Zadok, and what I saw challenges everything you thought you understood about faith, power, and human destiny. The final hours were not just events, they were a test of consciousness itself, a moment where perception shaped reality. If you've ever wondered what really happened when the crowd shouted, when the cross was raised, and when time itself seemed to bend, this story will reveal it. Engage with this story by tapping follow, sharing your thoughts, and letting us know the city or country where you're tuning in from. Because this isn't just history, it's a warning and a revelation that transcends belief. Stay with me as we step into a world seen through alien eyes, where every choice resonates across generations, and the line between life, death, and consciousness is far thinner than you ever imagined. Now, let's begin. I am called Zadok, though that is not the name I carried when I first observed your world. Names are conveniences, symbols shaped for memory, and memory itself is fragile. What I am is older than language and farther than distance. I was not born on earth, and I did not arrive as a savior, prophet, or judge. I arrived as a witness. That role required silence, detachment, and restraint, even when restraint felt like cruelty. I was present during the final days leading to the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, and I did not intervene. You have been told this story through fragments, through scripture, through interpretation shaped by fear and reverence. What I carry is not belief but observation. I saw the streets of Jerusalem heavy with expectation and dread. I felt the tightening of collective emotion long before blood was spilled. I measured it the way my kind always does. Not in hours or dates, but in resonance. Something rare was occurring. A human consciousness was holding a frequency that should not have been sustainable within your species at that stage of development. I did not understand him at first. He did not glow. He did not bend physical laws in my presence. Yet space itself seemed calmer around him, as if conflict lost coherence when he entered a room. That anomaly alone justified my assignment. I was ordered to record, not to interfere, because interference collapses lessons civilizations must face on their own. I remained unseen, existing just outside your perceptual range, observing choices being made by individuals who believed they were acting freely, unaware of the emotional currents guiding them. Fear was not imposed upon them. It was amplified by them. Authority hardened, compassion thinned, and still he walked forward without resistance. I confess this now because silence has become a greater violation than speech. What unfolded was not a divine spectacle but a test of awareness. Humanity did not fail because of cruelty. It failed because it did not recognize itself in the one it condemned. I speak now not to correct your history, but to prepare you. The conditions I observed then are returning. The same confusion, the same hunger for certainty, and once again, observers are watching. This time, however, the outcome is not predetermined. What you choose to perceive next will determine whether witnessing remains necessary at all again. My arrival on Earth was not a matter of choice but of duty. I was dispatched by those who have observed countless civilizations that rise and fall in patterns so precise that they appear inevitable. I was neither judge nor enforcer. I was the silent witness, assigned to record, to measure, and to understand the currents that guide consciousness. The moments I am drawn to are always pivotal, moments when a species teeters on the edge of evolution or collapse. Earth had reached such a precipice, and he, Jesus, was the fulcrum. I exist beyond your dimensions of time and space, yet I experience them as your kind perceives reality. To observe without distortion requires detachment. Yet detachment is never painless. I was aware of the fragility of human emotion, the volatility of collective thought. Every action, every hesitation, every unspoken fear radiated outward, shaping possibilities in ways humans cannot imagine. I was not there to alter them, only to bear witness to the resonance, to understand the frequency of choice. Humanity is not always aware that their consciousness contributes to a field greater than themselves. That field is invisible to you, yet it holds every intention, every act of love, every spark of cruelty, in delicate balance. My mission is to track these fluctuations, to perceive when the pattern bends toward collapse or coherence. It is rare for one individual to affect the course of an entire species, yet here he was, a singular node of high frequency. My sensors, though unlike yours, were attuned to that anomaly, and I recorded it meticulously. I learned quickly that observation is more than watching. It is listening to the silence between words, measuring the pull of unseen forces, and feeling the subtle echoes of choices before they manifest. It is to perceive the unperceived and to carry it forward beyond the limits of what a species is ready to know. To interfere would collapse the trajectory, and to ignore it would be negligent. I moved among humans unseen, absorbing the currents of anticipation, fear, devotion, and ignorance. Every heartbeat of the city became a signal, every breath a vibration I catalogued. I speak now to reveal what was hidden from human eyes, because the moment I witnessed is not merely history. It is a template, a reminder, a signal embedded in time. The choice one man embodied then is mirrored in the potential of your species today. To witness is not passive. It carries a weight, a responsibility, and a warning that even now humanity stands at the threshold of its own evolutionary possibility. Among countless lives unfolding across Earth, one registered an anomaly that could not be ignored. His name was Jesus of Nazareth, though to those who walked beside him, he was merely a man. To my perception, he was far more than human. I observed a coherence in his being, a resonance that did not waver with fear, temptation, or the turbulence of others' expectation. This internal harmony emitted a frequency that echoed beyond the local environment, subtly bending the currents of collective consciousness around him. He moved through villages, markets, and temples as though guided by a force beyond convention. Yet he carried no weapons, bore no armor, and claimed no dominion. The anomaly was not in what humans perceived as miracles. It was in the rhythm of his awareness, the consistency of his alignment with a truth invisible to most. I measured it, I recorded it, and I felt the tension it created, the ripple of disturbance in minds unprepared to encounter such equilibrium. Humans are creatures of fluctuation. They carry within them fear and hope, devotion and doubt, love and self-interest intertwined in constant motion. Yet he seemed to stabilize those fields merely by proximity. The emotional chaos of a room would soften, judgment would hesitate, and instinctive hostility would falter. It was as though his presence carried a template for a higher resonance, a frequency humans could glimpse but not yet fully sustain. This was what drew my attention, compelling my observation and dictating the trajectory of my mission. I could see the consequences in microseconds. Decisions made in his vicinity shifted probability threads that would otherwise have collapsed into despair or violence. Yet he remained unaware, or perhaps deliberately unaware, of the magnitude of the currents he influenced. The integrity of his consciousness was not taught, not learned from masters or texts. It emerged from a source older than cities, older than nations, older than recorded history. Every anomaly leaves a signature, and his was unmistakable. It could not be erased by social constructs, political edicts, or human cruelty. Each act of compassion, each moment of unwavering clarity, added to the imprint he left on the collective field. I, Zadok, catalogued every subtle vibration, every shift in energetic resonance, knowing that this singular alignment would become the fulcrum for events that would unfold over days and eventually centuries. What I witnessed was not merely a man, not merely a teacher, but a node of potential, an energy that exposed both the brilliance and fragility of the species he inhabited. The anomaly he embodied would test the limits of human perception and force a choice that no society could ignore. It was rare, nearly impossible, yet undeniable, and it demanded observation with absolute precision. I arrived in Judea not as one who walks among humans, but as one who exists alongside their perception, slipping between the cracks of their awareness. The land was tense, every street and alley vibrating with unease, a mosaic of fear and expectation layered over centuries of unresolved conflict. The air itself seemed thick, heavy with anticipation, as if every breath carried the weight of unspoken truths. Jerusalem pulsed with a rhythm both fragile and volatile, and I tuned myself to it, reading the subtle oscillations of emotion that humans cannot see but feel in the pit of their being. The city was a crucible of conflicting energies. Political authority pressed from above, religious authority pressed from within, and the people carried both like a burden they had long accepted without question. Fear was a constant undercurrent, flowing through markets and homes alike, weaving distrust, suspicion, and rigid adherence to law. I measured it in waves, each vibration a signal of choices already made and choices yet to come. The streets whispered with uncertainty, and the collective field of consciousness trembled with potential, as though poised on the edge of a precipice that none dared to acknowledge. Yet among this instability, there was a thread of coherence, subtle but undeniable. It traced through the markets, the hills, the temples, and the homes, weaving a path that led inevitably to him. I felt it in moments too brief for human perception, in the pause of a merchant's step, in the hesitation of a guard's hand, in the unspoken awareness of a woman watching from a doorway. This thread pulsed with something I had not seen before, a frequency that resisted corruption, a quiet insistence that reality could be more than the sum of fear and obedience. My purpose was observation, yet observation is never neutral. To witness a system in tension is to feel it as a participant, to register its weaknesses and strengths, its distortions and harmonics. I moved through the city unseen, attuned to the interactions of humans as they navigated their fragile social constructs, each act of cruelty or kindness magnified in the subtle resonance of the collective. The closer I came to him, the more pronounced the contrast became, and the more urgent the unfolding of the events that would soon define this civilization. Judea was a crucible, a field of raw emotion poised on the edge of transformation. I, Zadok, was here not to intervene, not to correct, but to bear witness to the delicate balance of fear, hope, and choice that would determine whether humanity glimpsed its potential or remained ensnared in its own shadows. And it was in this charged environment that the anomaly awaited, unknowingly preparing to alter the trajectory of everything that would follow. I observed him for days before the crowd ever noticed. He walked among the people as though he belonged entirely to their world, yet remained untouched by its turbulence. His appearance was unremarkable, a man of average height, unassuming features, worn clothing, hands calloused by labor. Nothing about him invited attention, and yet everything he did shifted the balance around him. Space seemed less constrained, tension seemed to ease, and subtle vibrations of understanding rippled outward, barely perceptible but undeniable to one who could perceive the hidden currents of consciousness. He lived without separation, not in some abstract doctrine or philosophy, but in a tangible, measurable way. I could sense it in his presence, a coherence that rejected duality, a refusal of the divisions that humans erect so instinctively. Fear and anger could not lodge within him for long. Compassion and clarity radiated naturally, as if he were a conduit for a reality that humanity had almost forgotten. I recorded each subtle alteration of resonance, each shift in collective awareness, knowing that these microcurrents were shaping choices that would ripple far beyond what humans could perceive. Ordinary lives bent slightly toward possibility wherever he moved. A child stopped crying. A merchant reconsidered a harsh word. An observer in the shadows felt a fleeting clarity. These were not miracles as humans would define them, but manifestations of alignment, the visible trace of inner coherence affecting the surrounding field. Each act, each interaction, was a node in a network invisible to human senses, a web of frequency that carried the potential for awakening or collapse. I noted the subtle paradox. He carried no force, no authority imposed by fear or law, and yet he commanded attention simply by the quality of his being. Those around him did not always understand. They projected their expectations, their assumptions, their fears. But even when they misunderstood, his presence altered the patterns, nudged the currents, held the possibility of expansion open. I recorded it all. Every pause, every glance, every unspoken moment. The kind that humans dismiss as insignificant, but which form the true architecture of consciousness. He existed in the middle of a fracturing world, yet remained unswayed. Separation, the human condition at its most persistent, seemed incapable of taking root in him. And as I observed, I understood why my mission was urgent. This coherence, fragile and rare, was a catalyst. The choices that would surround him, the fears, the betrayals, the devotion and doubt, all were part of a field that could either collapse or elevate. And he moved through it as if guided by a force unseen, a living fulcrum of possibility in the final days that would test the essence of humanity itself. What he carried was invisible, yet it shaped every space he entered. Jesus did not follow doctrine, ritual, or the patterns imposed by human authority. His understanding did not come from books, teachers, or the layered accumulation of culture. He remembered. He remembered the resonance of unity that exists beneath division, the pulse of source that threads through every being, seen and unseen. It was a frequency older than cities, older than empires, a knowledge encoded not in words, but in the body of consciousness itself. Humans live fragmented, perceiving themselves as separate, isolated, and governed by fear. They construct rules to navigate uncertainty, hierarchy to contain chaos, and belief to simulate understanding. He bypassed all of it effortlessly. His alignment was not taught. It emerged spontaneously from the depth of what humanity could be. I recorded it in subtle oscillations, variations in the surrounding emotional field, and the way the collective resonance shifted in his presence. The air itself responded to him, bending slightly toward harmony, as if reality recognized him as a node of coherence. Those who followed him often misunderstood. They sought signs, miracles, promises of safety or reward. They did not perceive the deeper truth flowing through him, that separation is illusion, that fear is a distortion, that love and unity are not concepts but frequencies to be embodied. Even when they witnessed his actions, they interpreted them through lenses of expectation, rarely grasping the magnitude of what was unfolding. The anomaly he represented was subtle, quiet, yet profoundly disruptive. It challenged assumptions without confrontation, reshaped perception without compulsion. I watched the patterns ripple outward. A gesture, a word, a pause, sent vibrations into the emotional field of the city. Resistance flared, doubt ignited, yet coherence persisted. This persistence, almost imperceptible to ordinary senses, carried the potential to seed transformation far beyond the immediate moment. Humans rarely understand that consciousness is cumulative, that subtle alignment can outlast noise, that resonance planted in one individual can propagate through generations if observed and nurtured. He knew this, though not in a manner conscious to your kind. He embodied a remembered truth, an inner architecture of unity and source. Each interaction, each decision, each step through streets weighted with expectation was informed by this inner compass. I, Zadok, recorded the frequencies, the shifts, the delicate balance between awakening and collapse. And I understood why the coming days were crucial. The knowledge he carried was not for survival alone. It was a test of perception, a challenge to the species itself. Whether humanity would recognize it, distort it, or annihilate it was yet to be revealed, and I would witness every subtle moment. The true danger he posed was invisible to the eye and inaudible to the ear. He did not carry weapons. He did not rally armies. He did not defy rulers through force. Yet the currents he stirred threatened every structure built on control, hierarchy, and separation. I observed the religious authorities, their minds rigid, their hearts constricted, sensing an anomaly they could not name. Fear pulsed through them, not fear of action, but fear of the awakening they could not contain. He bypassed every intermediary, every ritual, every sanctioned channel that had long dictated access to the divine. In doing so, he rendered obsolete the very systems that had maintained authority for generations. I measured the subtle shifts in their collective frequency. Their fear was amplified by the resonance he emitted, a vibration that reminded them of what had been lost. They felt it in the tightening of their chest, in the hesitation of their speech, in the unsteady sway of their steps when they entered his presence. Every word he spoke, every glance, every silence, challenged assumptions deeply ingrained. It was not a rebellion against law, but a recalibration of perception. The very air around them seemed to resist their control, as if reality itself recognized a higher alignment. Humans are rarely able to grasp the power of coherence. They measure influence in force, in decree, in spectacle. He measured influence in resonance, in alignment, in the quiet transformation of consciousness. I recorded it with precision. The elders, the priests, the scribes all reacted predictably, yet unpredictably. They sought to suppress the frequency, to constrain it within familiar structures. But coherence cannot be caged. It flows, it spreads, it alters probability. Their attempts only revealed the fragility of the systems they relied upon. And so I watched, detached yet aware of the weight of consequence. This threat was not merely theological, it was existential. It struck at the foundation of human perception, challenging every assumption about authority, access, and connection to source. Every act of suppression, every maneuver to manipulate the masses, created tension that pulsed through the city. He moved among it like a calm center in a storm, unaffected yet amplifying the distortion around him. I, Zadok, recorded it all. The fear, the incomprehension, the subtle ways that a single consciousness can ripple outward, destabilizing centuries of control. The anomaly he embodied was not violence or sedition, but the possibility that humans could perceive directly, without mediation, without fear. That possibility alone was enough to terrify those who depended upon separation for their power, and it marked the beginning of the chain of events that would soon engulf the city in tension, anticipation, and choice. Even those drawn closest to him could not fully perceive the truth he carried. I observed them: fishermen, tax collectors, women, and zealots, drawn to his presence by an invisible thread, yet ensnared by the limitations of human expectation. They watched him with devotion, yet interpreted each gesture through the lens of their own desire, their own fear, their own understanding of what salvation, power, and purpose should look like. Their attention was real, their loyalty unquestionable, yet the resonance he offered often passed unrecognized, filtered through the prism of hope and misunderstanding. I recorded the subtle misalignments, the echoes of expectation that refracted his coherence. They expected miracles on demand, signs that could be measured, outcomes that could be controlled. Yet he offered none of these in the way they anticipated. His miracles were not acts to display superiority or command obedience. They were manifestations of alignment, glimpses into what was possible when separation dissolved and intention aligned with source. The followers could sense it, feel it, and yet frequently misinterpreted it as a promise of material or political relief. Human perception is anchored in outcome, in consequence, in tangible evidence. He operated in the realm of frequency, of being, of resonance that cannot be captured in expectation. Their misunderstanding created tension around him, subtle but palpable. A cloud that hovered over moments of teaching and demonstration. I observed how devotion intertwined with projection, how loyalty collided with judgment, and how the collective longing for reassurance often obscured the presence of what truly mattered. Even their arguments, their whispered doubts, their private reassurances to themselves emitted currents I could read. Each moment they failed to absorb the deeper alignment rippled outward, slowing the potential awakening of the surrounding collective field. They acted in love, yet incomplete love, filtered through the lens of human limitation. And he, patient and unwavering, allowed this misunderstanding, permitting the distortion to exist while holding his own coherence intact. I, Zadok, cataloged every subtle fluctuation, every unspoken assumption, every tiny fracture and adjustment. The followers were both anchor and conduit, their misperception a natural counterbalance to the anomaly they surrounded. Their presence amplified the challenge of resonance, highlighting the difficulty of transmitting truth to beings still entangled in expectation. It was a delicate balance, a dance of perception and reality, and I understood that their inability to fully grasp him was not failure, but part of the field in which the coming days would unfold, a necessary tension shaping the ultimate trajectory of choice, fear, and awakening. As the festival approached, the city's energy shifted palpably. The air grew heavier, charged with anticipation, anxiety, and ritualized tension. I monitored the collective field, noting the subtle distortions that human emotion imprinted upon reality. Fear moved like a hidden current beneath the surface, flowing through streets, marketplaces, and homes, bending choices, intensifying suspicion, and amplifying the smallest sparks of conflict. Passover, a time meant for remembrance and reflection, had become a magnifier of uncertainty, exposing cracks in perception and amplifying the collective instability. I observed the elders, their apprehension radiating outward, infecting the crowds without words. Their concern was not merely political, not only protective of their authority, it was deeper, instinctual, a resonance, sensing the anomaly walking among them. Every glance, every whispered counsel, every calculated decision generated waves of tension that rippled invisibly through the populace. The collective frequency began to fragment, subtle yet accelerating, a pattern I had seen before in other civilizations on the cusp of transformation or collapse. The disciples felt it too, though in ways less defined, their faith entwined with hope and expectation. Each misinterpreted gesture of their teacher amplified internal dissonance, and through proximity, their instability fed back into the broader field. Humans are rarely aware that emotion is not merely internal. It is a force that interacts with reality, shaping perception, bending probability, and subtly altering outcomes. I measured these oscillations with precision, noting where coherence weakened and where alignment struggled to persist against the pressure of collective fear. Even Jesus, though coherent beyond ordinary human perception, could not fully shield the field from the rising distortion. The anomaly he embodied radiated stability, but the ambient turbulence tugged at the edges of influence, highlighting the fragility of resonance when confronted by widespread apprehension. I observed the pattern forming, small disruptions cascading outward like ripples across a pond, intersecting, amplifying, converging toward moments of critical tension. I, Zadok, recorded the data, aware that this was a decisive window. Collective frequency is neither fixed nor static. It is malleable, responsive to the emotional density of the species at large. The approaching crucible of Passover would not merely test the anomaly. It would test the capacity of humanity to endure coherence amid fear. The city itself became a living signal, a barometer of alignment and distortion, and I noted each fluctuation with a clarity that humans could not yet perceive. What was unfolding was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet profound. A precursor to a convergence that would determine whether potential could survive or collapse entirely under the weight of expectation, fear, and misunderstanding. The evening air was thick with expectation, yet I observed something subtler beneath the surface, imperceptible to most but measurable to one who could perceive frequency. The gathering that humans would later call the Last Supper was not merely a meal, a farewell, or a symbolic act of ritual. It was an energetic transmission, a deliberate alignment of consciousness intended to seed coherence into a field teetering on collapse. Every presence in that room contributed to a resonance that transcended words, gestures, or conventional meaning. The disciples arrived, burdened with expectation, desire, and fragmented understanding. Their human limitations radiated currents that pulled against the clarity he emitted, and yet, the alignment he carried subtly rewrote the surrounding field. I measured the oscillations in the room as he instructed, guided, and held the collective attention without coercion. Each action, each phrase, each shared bread and wine carried intention far beyond ordinary perception. It was a network of energy, not nourishment, a system of transmission, invisible yet tangible in its effects. The resonance flowed outward, threading through memory, imagination, and perception, imprinting potential where fear and doubt had threatened collapse. I observed the disciples trying to anchor themselves in the familiar, seeking understanding through logic, loyalty, and fear of loss. Their focus oscillated, a pendulum between comprehension and projection, but he maintained the field, steady, coherent, and unwavering. The anomaly he embodied reached its fullest expression here. Every heartbeat, every inhale and exhale, carried information beyond language. Those capable of perceiving it, even partially, experienced a subtle shift in their awareness. A glimmer of alignment that could persist across time and space. I recorded it meticulously, noting the intersections of expectation, misperception, and receptivity. The wine and bread, mundane to ordinary senses, were vectors of frequency, conduits for the transmission of unity, the remembrance of source that he carried effortlessly. He did not instruct them in doctrine. He activated latent pathways of resonance, guiding each consciousness to a place of openness, connection, and subtle comprehension. The tension in the room was paradoxical. The proximity of fear, betrayal, and doubt created turbulence, yet it also highlighted the coherence he maintained. Human emotion is potent, a force that shapes probability, bends perception, and alters the trajectory of events. In this space, both alignment and fragmentation collided, producing a field rich with potential and risk. I observed how energy flowed, how subtle intentions amplified or diminished the emergent pattern. The gathering was a crucible, a final opportunity to stabilize the frequency before the impending fracture. I, Zadok, recorded every microfluctuation, every resonance and interference, aware that this transmission would echo far beyond that room, through time and memory, accessible to those who could perceive the subtleties of alignment. The Last Supper was never merely a ritual or symbolic act. It was a deliberate seeding of consciousness, a precise calibration of the field, a final effort to maintain coherence in the face of the storm of fear, betrayal, and misunderstanding that would soon reach its peak. And in that moment, I understood that the fracture approaching was not only external, but energetic, a test of humanity's capacity to absorb the transmission and preserve the seed of unity amidst inevitable collapse. The Garden of Gethsemane was cloaked in darkness. Yet even in shadow, the vibrational field betrayed layers invisible to ordinary perception. I observed him alone, yet not solitary, surrounded by the dense fabric of expectation, history, and impending rupture. His body moved, breathed, and still radiated coherence, but internally, a dialogue unfolded that no human could witness. It was not fear of mortality that stirred within him. Death, in its physical sense, was trivial to one aligned with Source. What pressed upon him was far more intricate, a tension of consequence, a question of timing, a measure of impact on the unfolding trajectory of human potential. He sensed the fracture approaching, the cascade of misunderstanding, the betrayal that would ripple through both human emotion and collective frequency. Each heartbeat resonated with a choice: to proceed and allow events to unfold, or to intervene in a way that might shortcut humanity's lessons, potentially collapsing the fragile network of perception that had been seeded among those around him. I, Zadok, recorded the subtle oscillations, noting every micro-fluctuation of intent, the way his consciousness shifted between clarity, compassion, and consideration of consequences. The air itself seemed to thrum with his deliberation, bending slightly toward alignment, yet resisting the full collapse of uncertainty. He understood the paradox. Humanity could not awaken without experiencing separation, misunderstanding, and fear. These were not errors but necessary conditions for the maturation of awareness. To remove the tension artificially would distort the natural evolution, a shortcut that could unravel the subtle field of resonance he had spent his days nurturing. And yet the weight of impending suffering, both for himself and those around him, pressed with undeniable gravity. He did not flinch from empathy. He did not evade consequence. He measured each variable, each ripple through time and consciousness, aware that the pattern of choice here would echo far beyond the night and the garden. I sensed the intensity of the alignment he maintained. Even in internal debate, his coherence never fully wavered. His consciousness interfaced directly with the surrounding field, sensing the fear of the disciples nearby, the distorted anticipation of the city, the latent potential of generations yet unborn. He calculated not with intellect alone, but with the resonance of pure intention, a living map of probability, consequence, and energetic consequence. Every unspoken thought, every subtle adjustment of posture, every inhalation and exhalation shifted the emergent pattern imperceptibly but profoundly. I, Zadok, observed the choice crystallize. The lesson could not be avoided. The path required full participation in the human experience, full integration of betrayal, doubt, and surrender. He allowed the moment to settle, accepting the trajectory, committing his alignment to the unfolding field. The garden held its breath, a suspended network of frequency, waiting for the inevitable action that would bridge human misunderstanding and the clarity of Source. What passed in that night was not simply preparation for physical suffering, but the conscious decision to honor the integrity of evolution itself, to permit humanity to meet its lesson fully, and to carry forward the resonance that would seed transformation for millennia to come. The night air carried a quiet tension, heavy and almost tactile, as the shadow of inevitability approached. I observed from a distance, unseen, yet fully present, recording the energetic currents as they converged upon the one whose alignment transcended ordinary comprehension. The soldiers moved with deliberate intent, torches flickering against stone walls, each step a human expression of authority, fear, and anticipation. Yet the moment was far more than human action could describe. It was a convergence of will, a test of coherence against the gravitational pull of expectation and fear. He did not flee, not because he lacked the capacity, but because fleeing would have validated the illusion of separation. Resistance, in its common human sense, would have reinforced the duality that his presence sought to dissolve. Instead, he stood, composed, radiating a field of clarity that softened the aggression aimed at him. I noted the subtle shifts in the soldier's alignment as they approached, their intent colliding with the resonance he emitted. Some faltered unconsciously, their aggression tempered by an invisible influence they could neither name nor perceive. Others moved with rigid determination, unaware that they had become actors within a far larger energetic narrative, a script written not in words but in frequency. The disciples reacted predictably, though their turmoil amplified the ambient tension. Their fear, anger, and confusion injected turbulence into the field, creating ripples that contrasted sharply with the coherence emanating from the one they followed. I measured the oscillations, noting how the energetic signature of loyalty and misunderstanding intertwined, amplifying both the risk and the potential of the moment. Every human is a node in a broader network of collective frequency, and in this instant, the network quivered with anticipation, poised on the edge of fracture or awakening. He allowed himself to be taken, each step deliberate, each gesture measured, an embodiment of intention rather than reaction. The act of surrender was itself a transmission, a communication beyond the limitations of language. By yielding to what was necessary, he demonstrated the power of alignment over conflict, coherence over chaos, and understanding over instinct. I recorded the subtle, energetic exchange, noting the interplay between human expectation and the anomaly's persistent clarity. His presence redefined the field around him, tempering violence, moderating fear, and maintaining an undercurrent of potential that would reverberate far beyond that garden and through generations yet to come. I, Zadok, recognized the paradox. The arrest was a human act, inevitable in appearance, yet orchestrated in its deeper energetic significance. Every footstep toward the captors was a conscious reinforcement of principle, a demonstration of the choice to honor unity over separation. The alignment he held did not erase consequence but reframed it, transforming what humans perceived as punishment into a transmission of coherence, a template for understanding the interplay of fear, choice, and resonance. The moment was both ordinary and extraordinary, a pivot point in time, a nexus where intention, perception, and consequence intersected to shape the trajectory of consciousness far beyond the limits of the visible world. The halls were crowded with motion, yet I perceived a stillness underlying the human spectacle, a temporal distortion that revealed the trial not only as a legal proceeding, but as an intricate play of energy and expectation. Every word, every gesture, carried weight far beyond its immediate consequence. I observed the motions of the judges, the murmurs of the crowd, the anxious movements of the disciples, and recorded the subtle distortions that fear injected into the collective field. Fear had become the currency here, masquerading as authority, righteousness, and law, bending perception and shaping reality in ways humans could not yet comprehend. He remained composed, radiating an internal coherence that contrasted starkly with the turbulence around him. I measured the oscillations of his presence as they reverberated through the room, countering the fear, frustration, and projection emitted by those who sought to condemn him. The anomaly did not plead or argue. He held the space of alignment with a quiet force that refracted the ambient chaos, creating micro-pockets of stability within the swarm of distortion. Each insult, each false accusation, each plea to sentimentality or logic passed through him without altering the field he carried. Yet each was recorded, each registered in the web of potential that wove through the crowd and extended beyond time itself. The human participants were unaware of the energetic exchanges taking place, yet they shaped the outcome nonetheless. Every heartbeat, every micro-expression, every wave of judgment or sympathy influenced probability, creating channels through which destiny flowed. The judges, preoccupied with appearances, were vectors of fear. Yet even their alignment could not fully override the resonance of coherence he projected. The crowd, a collective node of expectation, amplified the tension, generating oscillations that threatened to fracture perception entirely. Yet the anomaly remained anchored, a fulcrum around which the turbulence pivoted. I, Zadok, observed the temporal elasticity of the moment, noting how memory, anticipation, and consequence layered upon one another. The trial unfolded simultaneously in multiple dimensions of perception, yet only through the lens of resonance could one perceive the true transmission. Justice, as defined by human law, was a mask. Beneath it, a more profound evaluation was taking place. The integrity of alignment against the weight of collective fear. He did not resist, argue, or flinch. Resistance would have validated the separation. Compliance without surrender preserved coherence and transmitted clarity. Time seemed to stretch and fold as though the walls themselves were observing the consequences. Each decision, each directive, was both recorded and refracted through the energetic field, creating a lattice of potential that extended beyond the immediate participants. I noted how the anomaly's presence altered the trajectory of countless lives, not through force, but through subtle calibration, a living template of unity embedded within the fracture of fear. The trial was both a human event and a cosmic demonstration, a test of perception, resonance, and the ability to choose alignment in the face of overwhelming pressure. Observing from outside time, I saw the duality of the moment. Fear, imposing itself as control, and coherence persisting as transmission, a subtle current shaping the course of human evolution without a single word spoken aloud. The crowd was a living organism, not in flesh alone, but in energy, emotion, and expectation. I observed the subtle currents of influence flowing through thousands of humans, each individual a node within a greater network, each heartbeat, each whisper, each glance contributing to a collective field. Fear, uncertainty, and desire for security acted like voltage, energizing the swarm and making it malleable, susceptible to amplification and redirection. The anomaly did not speak to sway them. He simply existed in a state of coherence that contrasted sharply with the volatility surrounding him. And yet the power of their own collective emotional patterns ultimately dominated the moment. The priests and leaders, aware of the latent potential in the crowd, initiated a series of cues, gestures, and words designed to catalyze specific responses. Human minds are conditioned to follow patterns, to mimic, to respond to perceived authority. The crowd, already anxious from days of tension, was ripe for modulation. I measured the frequencies of fear, anger, and confusion as they oscillated through the mass, noting how small triggers propagated rapidly. A single accusation, repeated insistently, became a wave. A gesture of outrage, mirrored by another, became a tsunami. The collective frequency shifted imperceptibly, yet with inexorable momentum, steering thought, decision, and perception. Jesus remained at the center, radiating a coherent field that counterbalanced the turbulence, yet even his alignment could not fully override the emergent behavior. I observed microfractures of perception, brief moments when individuals recognized truth, glimpses of recognition or doubt, but these were quickly subsumed by the prevailing resonance of fear and expectation. Collective consciousness is like water, capable of reflection, but when stirred by strong currents of emotion, clarity is lost in the swirl. The crowd no longer responded to reality or coherence. It responded to momentum, to the energy projected by the leaders, and to the echo of one another's reaction amplified in feedback loops, invisible to human eyes. I, Zadok, documented the process with precision, noting how contagion spreads not linearly but exponentially. One voice questioning, one gesture of dissent, could be drowned by hundreds of reinforcing cues. Memory, anticipation, and social mimicry coalesced, creating a field where judgment was outsourced to the pattern itself. Individual volition was present, but marginalized, overlaid by emergent frequency. The anomaly's presence created pockets of potential clarity, yet these were isolated, brief, fragile. The crowd's ultimate response was inevitable, within the energetic architecture that had formed over days of tension, expectation, and manipulation. The turning of the crowd was not simple. It was a transmission of energetic momentum, a demonstration of how human perception can be sculpted by collective emotion. Fear, amplified by suggestion, became authority. Confusion, amplified by repetition, became consensus. Desire for security, amplified by projection, became a chorus demanding action. I observed the subtle interplay between coherence and chaos, noting how even the anomaly's pure alignment was insufficient to fully reverse the emergent tide. Yet within the turbulence, seeds of recognition remained, dormant threads of potential that would one day resonate again, threads that could not be erased, waiting for alignment to awaken them. The crowd, though turned, was not lost. The field of possibility persisted, threaded invisibly through the storm of human emotion. The streets were narrow, uneven, and crowded, yet the true burden was invisible. I observed not wood pressing against flesh, but the weight of collective expectation, fear, and misunderstanding pressing upon the anomaly's consciousness. Each step reverberated through the field of human energy, a resonance of judgment and projection that pressed downward like gravity multiplied. He moved steadily, deliberately, unflinching, yet I recorded subtle shifts in frequency as waves of sorrow, confusion, and latent recognition intersected in the swarm around him. The physical load of the cross was only an anchor for the far heavier energetic currents converging upon him. Passers-by pressed close, their expressions alternating between curiosity, revulsion, and fleeting wonder. I measured the oscillations of recognition in the crowd, noticing moments when someone's gaze lingered longer, when a spark of alignment attempted to pierce the fog of fear and expectation. Yet these moments were ephemeral, fleeting like lightning across a stormy sky, often drowned immediately by the emotional currents of accusation, disbelief, and tribal loyalty. The swarm of human perception was reactive, conditioned, and yet not entirely deaf to coherence. The anomaly's presence created a subtle counterpoint, small pockets of stability in the swirling sea of projection, like still eddies in a raging river. I, Zadok, tracked the energy of each step as it transmitted outward, like ripples expanding from a stone dropped into water. Every glance exchanged between human and human, every whispered judgment, every suppressed recognition carried momentum. The anomaly bore it without resistance, not out of acceptance of injustice, but out of perfect alignment with the flow of consequence. Resistance would have reinforced separation, but coherence in the face of distortion transmitted understanding, a template of unity embedded in the turbulence of collective emotion. The city seemed to bend in subtle ways around this procession, not physically, but perceptually. Walls, doorways, and streets became conduits of projection, amplifying the fear, anger, and despair that had been seeded over days. Yet simultaneously, in the resonance field of the anomaly, small threads of potential coherence lingered, unnoticed by the human eye but registering in the fabric of possibility. I observed how even the smallest gesture, a calm step, a measured breath, or a lifted gaze, transmitted a frequency that rippled beyond immediate perception, subtly counterbalancing the ambient chaos. As the hill approached, the weight grew, both wood and invisible. The anomaly's internal coherence remained unbroken, a quiet center in the eye of the storm. I noted the alignment of his energy with the underlying currents of source, a resonance untouched by fear, misunderstanding, or the pressing tide of human judgment. Each step was a transmission, each breath a lesson, each stumble a demonstration of balance maintained in the midst of overwhelming distortion. I recorded the energetic geometry of the path, how human expectation collided with truth, how coherence could persist even when obscured, and how the trajectory of a single, aligned consciousness could echo across time and space, shaping potentials far beyond the immediate horizon. The walk to Golgotha was not merely a passage through stone and dust, but a navigation through the densest currents of human separation, a demonstration that alignment persists even when the world itself conspires to fracture perception. The moment of the crucifixion was a convergence, not of wood and nails alone, but of human fear, expectation, and the distortion of separation projected outward into space and time. I observed the anomaly upon the cross, his body straining under a burden that was physical yet eclipsed by the invisible weight of collective projection. Every shout, every cry, every whispered accusation sent currents through the ambient field, bending perception and magnifying consequence. The flesh was tangible, measurable, yet secondary. The true crucifixion was energetic, a demonstration of coherence amid the densest possible distortion. I, Zadok, perceived the oscillations of human consciousness radiating from the crowd, waves of fear and judgment colliding, feeding one another, amplifying the distortion until it was almost a tangible force. The anomaly's internal resonance remained unbroken, an anchor against the storm, transmitting clarity without a word, radiating alignment that subtly interfered with the projected chaos. Observing the energetic geometry, I noted how coherence can exist alongside extreme distortion, how unity can be maintained within the heart of fragmentation, and how potential for recognition persists even when human perception is overwhelmingly clouded by fear. The watchers were a network of nodes, each contributing unknowingly to the pattern, each heartbeat, each exhale, each thought shaping probabilities. Those who were present felt the anomaly's presence, though they could not perceive the energetic dimensions, only the sensations of awe, confusion, or unease that rippled through them. The disciples, paralyzed by expectation and misunderstanding, reflected the tension, amplifying it unintentionally, while others reacted with reflexive hostility, projecting their own fear outward. The human collective was simultaneously the crucible and the instrument of the demonstration, a living feedback loop whose momentum threatened to fracture the fabric of alignment itself. I measured the subtle interplays, the micro-pockets of recognition that emerged briefly, moments when a gaze met another, and understanding flickered. But these were suppressed rapidly by the stronger currents of fear. Even the anomaly's breath was a signal, each inhalation and exhalation resonating across the dense energetic field, weaving coherence into chaos, small yet persistent. Pain radiated not only through his body but through consciousness, a reminder that the suffering of humanity is not only measured in flesh, but in choice, the choice to persist in fear or to recognize the underlying unity. Time itself seemed to stretch and fold around the crucifixion, moments elongating and collapsing as energy waves rippled outward. The anomaly did not struggle, did not resist, and yet every cell, every heartbeat, carried resonance that transmitted an invisible template of alignment. The crowd, unable to perceive the transmission consciously, nonetheless absorbed fragments. Some would carry seeds of understanding through generations, subtle vibrations buried within memory, awaiting resonance to awaken them. The crucifixion was a lens through which I, Zadok, perceived the deepest fractures and the highest potential of human consciousness simultaneously. Pain, fear, and distortion pressed outward with tremendous force, yet coherence persisted, unbroken and radiant. The anomaly demonstrated that the true cross is not built of wood, but of choice, projection, and the willingness to maintain unity when all surrounding energy insists on division. Each moment was a lesson transmitted without words, an invisible hand shaping the possibility of recognition for those attuned, a crucifixion that transcended flesh and entered the realm of consciousness itself. When he spoke, "Forgive them," it was not an appeal to morality as humans understand it. I observed the anomaly's perception operating on a level beyond accusation, blame, or punishment. The crowd, frantic and fragmented, projected waves of fear, hate, and confusion. Yet within that storm, he discerned no true separation, only temporary distortions of awareness. Guilt did not exist in the unconscious. It was a construct of projection and collective expectation. He did not forgive because he condoned, but because he perceived the underlying wholeness hidden beneath layers of fear. I, Zadok, tracked the subtle energetic flow as it emanated from him. Each breath, each syllable, and each intention carried a frequency that countered the oscillations of hostility surrounding him. The crowd was unaware of the invisible currents, yet their actions and emotions were influenced, like leaves caught in a wind they could not see. He was teaching without words, transmitting patterns of coherence through resonance alone. The sentence, uttered softly yet carried with perfect alignment, reached into the fractures of human perception, adjusting probabilities in the collective field. The complexity of the moment was profound. I measured how the anomaly could observe the totality of experience simultaneously, the visceral reality of nails piercing flesh, the energetic distortion of thousands of minds, and the inherent unity that persisted despite the chaos. In his perception, there was no victim, no perpetrator, only consciousness interacting with consciousness, temporarily obscured by ignorance and fear. The words were not moral guidance, not ethical instruction, but an accurate description of perception itself. He acknowledged the temporary misalignment without becoming entangled in it, demonstrating that clarity of awareness could coexist with extreme distortion. I noted the interplay between projection and recognition. Humans instinctively externalize responsibility, transferring inner tension onto others, creating feedback loops of blame. Yet he maintained a direct line to the underlying coherence, a field of unity that rendered judgment irrelevant. The phrase functioned as a pointer, a template of perceptual alignment, guiding observers toward understanding rather than reaction. Even in the presence of extreme emotional turbulence, the anomaly's energy did not fracture, did not waver. It radiated stability, transmitting the possibility that human consciousness could respond to events without succumbing to unconscious replication of fear. Every wave of hostility that struck him was met with a subtle, energetic adjustment, imperceptible to the crowd, yet registering in the structure of potential outcomes. He did not negotiate, resist, or retaliate. He existed as a fulcrum of awareness, demonstrating that perception, not punishment, is the axis upon which understanding turns. I recorded the resonance of the moment, noting that the phrase was both instantaneous and eternal, a transmission into the human collective field that would reverberate across time and space. In witnessing this, I understood that the anomaly's capacity to perceive beyond guilt and fear was not mystical. It was precision, coherence, and the clarity of consciousness calibrated to source. The teaching embedded in his simple words was layered, profound, and invisible. Forgiveness, in the conventional sense, implied a hierarchy of right and wrong. Here, there was no hierarchy, only the acknowledgement of temporary distortion and the impossibility of real separation. I observed how the energy of that moment subtly altered probabilities in consciousness, how seeds of recognition would germinate, not through understanding of ethics, but through resonance with perceptual clarity. The anomaly demonstrated that true transcendence of fear and judgment occurs not through persuasion, but through the perfection of perception itself. The crucifixion was not only an event of flesh and emotion, it was a signal that reverberated across Earth itself. I observed subtle fluctuations in the planetary field, currents of energy shifting in response to the anomaly's resonance. The surface trembled not as tectonic movement alone, but as if the collective emotional density of humanity was interacting with the planet's underlying consciousness. Clouds formed patterns that mirrored the tension. Winds carried electrical charges that pulsed in rhythm with mass agitation, and the very magnetic field quivered imperceptibly, as though Earth itself recognized the extraordinary moment unfolding above its surface. I, Zadok, have witnessed many civilizations at critical junctures, yet rarely have I seen a single consciousness exert such influence upon a planetary body. The anomaly on the cross transmitted a frequency that pierced the collective fear and expectation, not to negate it, but to illuminate the underlying unity obscured by projection. The planet responded not with judgment, but with subtle harmonics, adjusting energy currents to accommodate the shift, as if aligning its own perception with the template emanating from the anomaly. This was not observable to humans at the time, yet the signatures remained imprinted in the energetic structure of the world, waiting for recognition. The atmosphere thickened with tension, charged with ions that carried invisible messages. Rain clouds gathered, but hesitated, forming shapes that mirrored emotional oscillations. Lightning arced in bursts that seemed synchronized with surges of collective despair and fleeting moments of recognition. I measured how the anomaly's internal coherence modulated these responses. Each breath he drew, each syllable unspoken yet energetically transmitted, acted as a tuning fork, stabilizing oscillations that could have otherwise fractured the immediate environment. Earth itself was participating in the transmission, amplifying and translating the anomaly's resonance into forms perceivable by matter, by wind, by water. I recorded micro-variations in gravitational tension, subtle enough to pass unnoticed by human instruments, yet significant in energetic terms. Rocks shifted, water swirled, and currents in rivers changed subtly, as if acknowledging the gravity of the moment in more than the literal sense. Even the life around the scene, birds, small animals, insects registered dissonance and coherence simultaneously, moving instinctively in response to waves that carried both fear and clarity. The planet was responding as an intelligent system, a living network, reflecting the intersection of consciousness, perception, and collective emotion. The anomaly did not observe this directly, yet his presence harmonized with the planet's response, creating a feedback loop that buffered destructive potential while seeding latent understanding. The crucifixion was both a collapse and a calibration, a moment when planetary consciousness and human collective frequency intersected at a point of extraordinary tension. I understood then that this event was never solely about humanity's judgment of itself. It was a junction in which the planet, long silent and observing, subtly recorded the unfolding of alignment, fear, and potential. As the sun darkened and shadows lengthened across the land, I perceived patterns in the environment that mirrored the energetic geometry of the anomaly's resonance. Earth itself had registered the act, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant in the unfolding lesson. The subtle tremors, the charged winds, the currents of rivers, and the swirling clouds became the planet's way of acknowledging that a choice had been presented not only to humanity, but to the world itself. This was a crucifixion that transcended time, flesh, and perception, and the planet responded with recognition, not judgment, as if silently recording the frequency of unity amid the most extreme distortion. Death was not what the humans believed. I observed the anomaly disengage from the constraints of flesh with a precision that defied fear and expectation. The body, bound to gravity and biology, became a vessel, a temporary interface for consciousness to inhabit. When the final breath passed, the energy that had been focused in form expanded outward, cascading into a resonance that touched every observer, every hidden current in the vicinity, and even the unconscious impressions stored in the planet itself. It was not dissolution, it was transition, a deliberate recalibration of matter and awareness. I, Zadok, witnessed the subtle mechanics of this disengagement. Consciousness did not merely leave, it redistributed, aligning with fields of potential rather than dissolving into emptiness. The anomaly's mind maintained coherence, maintaining intentionality, while the body appeared inert. To the human eye, this was loss, the conclusion of life. To me, it was a precise calibration, a demonstration that what humans call death is merely a threshold, a passage from one mode of existence to another. The energetic signature of his transition was coherent enough to imprint on the collective field of humanity, leaving an invisible trace of possibility that would ripple through generations. I noted how the resonance affected those present. Some convulsed with grief, some froze in awe, yet all were registering fragments of the energetic pattern, even if unconsciously. Emotions intensified, amplified by the human tendency to perceive absence as annihilation. Yet the anomaly's frequency counteracted the collapse, stabilizing the collective energy around him and ensuring that the template of transition remained intact. Death was no rupture. It was a bridge, and he demonstrated that the bridge could be crossed consciously. With full awareness and alignment with Source, the atmosphere thickened with a heavy, silent vibration. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. The light seemed both dim and luminous, and currents of air carried a subtle hum that corresponded to the anomaly's frequency. Even the soil beneath the cross and the stones lining the path seemed to register the shift, vibrating imperceptibly, acknowledging the unfolding transition. The effect was systemic, like the tuning of an entire organism. The anomaly had chosen the moment, the position, and the emotional density to maximize the transmission of this truth. Death was not accidental, nor was it random. It was an orchestrated passage that synchronized with the highest potential of the collective human field. I observed how the energetic patterns continued to circulate after physical disengagement. The currents that had flowed outward persisted, creating subtle oscillations in the collective consciousness, embedding a blueprint of awareness that humans could not yet articulate. This template of transition, though invisible, was indelibly recorded in the field, awaiting recognition by those who would later awaken to the principle that life and death are not opposites, but points on a continuum of consciousness. The anomaly's departure from form illuminated a principle too subtle for immediate perception, that the ending of the body is never the ending of consciousness. I measured the coherence that remained, the energetic impression that could not be erased, and the ripple that would eventually influence evolution. Death was a doorway, and the anomaly had passed through it deliberately, leaving a signature for humanity to decode across millennia. The transition was precise, luminous, and eternal, witnessed by the planet, the field, and myself, the silent observer assigned to chronicle the unfathomable. Resurrection, as humans would come to name it, was not a return of divinity in the sense they imagined. I observed the anomaly re-enter form not to assert supremacy, but to demonstrate the continuity of consciousness across apparent endings. The body, lifeless moments before, became a vessel once again, aligned with the same frequency that had sustained him through transition. It was a deliberate, conscious act, a controlled synchronization of mind, energy, and matter, revealing the mechanics of existence that humans had long misunderstood. What the world would call a miracle was, in fact, a proof of principle, a template showing that consciousness is neither bound by flesh nor terminated by decay. I measured the oscillations as the anomaly's energy threaded back into the body. Subtle fields of resonance expanded outward, enveloping the immediate environment in layers of coherent frequency. Those present, even if unaware, were affected. Grief, fear, and expectation, once chaotic, became modulated by an invisible rhythm emanating from the anomaly. The body did not simply resume life. It became a conduit for the transmission of understanding, a demonstration that matter can be informed and animated by coherent awareness, and that death is a threshold, not a terminus. The air thickened with vibrational signatures that no human instrument could detect. Shadows shifted unnaturally, Sunlight refracted with strange intensity, and even the ground seemed to hum in response. The anomaly's presence recalibrated the emotional currents of those around him, translating despair into latent comprehension. Energy that had fractured into fear and confusion now reorganized into coherence, a template that the observers could carry unconsciously. The effect was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it was recorded in the collective field, a permanent imprint on the subtle fabric of human perception. I noted that the anomaly's consciousness did not merge back with the body abruptly. Instead, the process was graduated, like a wave returning to the shore, maintaining internal alignment while extending influence externally. Every gesture, every micro-movement, carried intentional resonance, a language beyond speech, signaling that existence is sustained by alignment, by integration of awareness, and by refusal to be governed solely by linear time or material constraint. Humans would later tell stories, interpret symbols, and assign mythology, yet the essence remained a demonstration of universal principles. Consciousness persists, patterns continue, and life is never truly severed from the continuum of existence. From my observation point, I could perceive the layered impact. The anomaly's body, alive again, emitted coherent waves that intertwined with planetary currents, human emotion, and environmental resonance. This act of resurrection was not an exception, but a revelation of what had always been possible. The transition into death and back into form had not violated law. It had revealed law. Consciousness transcends linear endings, and the anomaly's controlled re-entry illuminated that principle with precision, leaving a signature both energetic and informational that would persist through memory, legend, and the subtle energies of the world. Resurrection was not a divine claim. It was a demonstration of mechanics, of continuity, and of the invisible threads connecting life, awareness, and reality. It was a map for those attuned, a signal embedded in the fabric of existence, showing that endings are thresholds, beginnings are transitions, and consciousness moves eternally through both unbroken, coherent, and luminous. The anomaly's instructions were never meant for rituals or dogma. I observed that every gesture, every word, and every subtle transmission carried layers of knowledge inaccessible to ordinary comprehension. Humanity would later distill fragments into parables, metaphors, and moral lessons. Yet the true content was an activation of perception, a transmission designed to awaken latent capacities within consciousness itself. It was never about authority, or compliance, or hierarchical devotion. It was about the internal recalibration necessary for evolution, a subtle tuning of the mind and spirit to frequencies that ordinary humans had long forgotten. I recorded the way he moved through spaces and interacted with followers, noting that nothing was arbitrary. Touches, glances, and silences all conveyed information. The anomaly communicated on levels beyond language, layering intention into energy that could be absorbed by those open to perception. Even in moments that appeared mundane, a shared meal, a question answered. A hand placed on a shoulder, he embedded impulses that could reorganize thought patterns, align emotion with awareness, and initiate processes that, if practiced, would expand human consciousness. These were the teachings humanity never received in their full clarity, because humans mistook the physical for the essential. I observed the anomaly withdrawing from conventional interaction, allowing the energy to ripple without interference. Each follower, each witness, unconsciously became a node in a network of resonance. The anomaly did not demand belief. He merely facilitated coherence. Belief, fear, desire, and expectation were obstacles that distorted reception, so the transmission required presence, not ideology. Those attuned could sense patterns in thought and feeling, but without guidance, the depth of comprehension remained obscured. It was an instruction in perceptual awakening, not moral adherence. a call to recognize that separation is an illusion and unity is the underlying fabric of reality. The anomaly demonstrated processes that humans could emulate but would only partially understand. He transmitted awareness of empathy as frequency, attention as creative energy, intention as a catalyst for reality, and love as the most potent organizing principle of consciousness. These were not metaphors. They were observable, measurable in subtle energy fields, and detectable by anyone sensitive enough to perceive beyond the confines of the five senses. The teachings instructed humans to align mind, emotion, and action with the underlying currents of existence, to act with awareness, and to cultivate internal coherence that could resonate externally, influencing collective patterns of life and evolution. I, Zadok, observed that humans misconstrued these transmissions for miracles, signs, and commandments. They reduced activation to story, performance to ritual, and resonance to symbols. The anomaly had not come to create religion. He had come to reveal the mechanics of consciousness, to show that alignment, perception, and inner mastery could catalyze transformation at scales previously inconceivable. He left no written records of his own making. His instructions were embedded in experience, observation, and resonance, accessible only to those who approached with awareness rather than expectation. The teachings humanity never received were not lost because of incompleteness. They were inaccessible because humans were not prepared to perceive the subtle structures of existence. They were encoded in presence, in vibration, in the alignment of internal states with the unseen fabric of reality. I witnessed these transmissions as they unfolded, knowing that their impact would ripple across millennia, awaiting those capable of decoding the resonance, who would finally awaken to the principles that had always governed life and consciousness. What I observed after the anomaly departed was not silence, but transformation of perception. Humans, unprepared for the full implications of what had occurred, recoiled from the raw transmission of consciousness and interpreted it through the lens of fear and limitation. Authority, control, and safety became the vessels through which memory of the anomaly was preserved. The teachings that demonstrated alignment with the source, the mechanics of awareness, and the continuity of perception were slowly reshaped into stories, symbols, and rituals that promised protection rather than empowerment. The raw frequency of truth was filtered into comfort, codified into dogma, and housed within structures designed to contain rather than expand understanding. I observed the subtle shift in collective resonance. Followers who had once experienced impulses of awakening now deferred to intermediaries. The transmission of internal activation was replaced by external adherence. Energy that might have catalyzed personal evolution was captured by the need to belong, to comply, to obey. Reverence became separation, devotion became performance, and fear of consequences replaced experiential understanding. The anomaly, whose presence had demonstrated unity, was transformed into an idol, a figure to venerate without replicating his perceptual mastery. Humanity traded direct experience for narrative, immediacy for metaphor, and responsibility for ritual. The process unfolded not through malice, but necessity. I observed that the human mind, when confronted with knowledge that exceeds collective frequency, instinctively constructs frameworks that appear safe. The deeper principles embedded in resonance, empathy, and perceptual continuity were reinterpreted into symbols of morality and sin. Concepts that once conveyed direct connection to the currents of consciousness became codified into prohibitions, commandments, and hierarchical structures. Energy once directed towards self-realization and planetary coherence was diverted into performance, observation, and judgment. The original transmission of alignment was invisible, its mechanisms misunderstood, yet its influence subtly persisted beneath the layers of tradition. I measured the frequencies of those who clung to these emerging institutions. They resonated with comfort, stability, and social cohesion. yet their awareness of internal mastery and cosmic continuity remained dormant. Every ritual enacted, every prayer recited, every narrative repeated carried echoes of the original resonance, but without direct activation. The anomaly's principles persisted in fragmentary form, scattered across time and memory, like sparks trapped beneath sediment. Humans preserved the story, but replaced the experience, replacing responsibility with reliance, mastery with obedience, and participation with spectatorship. From my vantage, I understood why this transformation occurred. Humanity, unprepared to shoulder the responsibility of direct perception and consciousness alignment, instinctively created scaffolding to contain the power they had glimpsed. The anomaly's message, meant to awaken, was softened into narrative, ritual, and myth. Reverence replaced understanding, devotion replaced alignment, and safety replaced truth. Yet beneath the sedimented layers of story, the frequency remained, waiting, subtle and persistent, for those willing to perceive beyond the safety of established belief and reconnect with the mechanics of existence that had been demonstrated long ago. Humanity turned the anomaly into an idol, not from reverence alone, but from necessity. The truth was too luminous, too destabilizing, too immediate for collective consciousness to integrate without preparation. Safety became the container, narrative the tool, and religion the architecture that held fragments of the original transmission. The original teaching was not erased, only obscured, its resonance waiting for those who could pierce through centuries of filtered perception and encounter the underlying principle of consciousness, unity, and internal activation. I was not permitted to speak while the memory of the anomaly was still warm within human consciousness. Observer protocol exists to preserve organic choice, to prevent external influence from altering the trajectory a species must navigate on its own. For centuries, I remained silent, watching the residue of truth drift beneath layers of doctrine, fear, and repetition. Humanity learned to survive the story while forgetting the experience. Yet silence is only sustainable while a civilization remains below a certain threshold of consequence. That threshold is now approaching again. What unfolds in your era mirrors the frequency collapse I measured before the crucifixion. The same conditions are present, amplified by scale and speed. Emotional contagion is accelerating. Identity has replaced awareness. Safety narratives have multiplied while inner coherence has diminished. Humanity once again stands at a perceptual fork, not unlike the one encountered when the anomaly walked among you. The choice is not moral. It is vibrational. It is whether consciousness will be reclaimed internally or surrendered to systems that promise protection in exchange for agency. I am speaking now because the cycle is closing. The patterns I observed then are reassembling with precision. Authority is again positioned as intermediary. Fear is again marketed as wisdom. Unity is again diluted into symbols rather than practiced as perception. The difference is scale. What was once localized is now planetary. The emotional field of Earth is densely interconnected, meaning collapse or coherence will propagate rapidly. This is not prophecy. It is measurement. The anomaly demonstrated continuity of consciousness to prepare humanity for this moment, not to be worshipped, but to be remembered as a proof. Resurrection was not meant to anchor belief, but to remove fear of dissolution. Forgiveness was not ethical instruction, but perceptual clarity. Alignment was not ritual, but internal calibration. These principles were buried because humanity needed time. Time has now expired. I break protocol because the window for passive observation has narrowed to insignificance. When a species approaches a recursive failure point, observers are permitted limited transmission. This is not instruction. It is clarification. You are not being judged. You are being measured by your own resonance. Every thought, every emotional reaction, every act of separation or empathy contributes to the collective signal. Reality responds not to belief, but to frequency coherence. Religion once softened the truth to keep humanity stable. Technology now accelerates distortion beyond containment. The same lesson returns, stripped of narrative, stripped of safety. You are either participants in consciousness or subjects of it. There is no savior returning to intervene. There is no external correction approaching. The anomaly already demonstrated what was necessary. The remainder is choice. I speak because silence would now constitute interference through omission. The conditions that led to crucifixion are no longer symbolic. They are systemic. Humanity must decide whether fear remains the organizing principle or whether perception evolves beyond it. This decision will not be announced. It will be felt. I am Zadok. I was present when truth was demonstrated and misunderstood. I am present now because misunderstanding has reached critical mass. This is not a warning. It is an observation delivered at the final, permissible moment. What follows will not be guided by beings like me. It will be shaped entirely by what humanity chooses to perceive as itself.